Okay.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to day 3 of the the volunteer leadership virtual convening. We're excited for you to join us this morning at 9 a.m. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I have Nicole R. Smith with the Adrian R. Center for the Performing Arts. She is the Volunteer and Internship Services Manager. They're based in Miami, Florida. And just a fun fact, she is a former Miami Dolphins cheerleader and is an author. So go ahead, Nicole, kick it off.
Well, thank you. So actually, I wasn't a Miami Dolphins cheerleader. I didn't quite make it. I tried out enough times that I should have made it, but that's okay. So you can speak it into existence. I will take it. Good morning, everybody. I am so thrilled to be here. Let's just go ahead and get started. Let me get my video ready. And here we go. Hi, I am so thrilled to be presenting to you today on recognition and volunteer development. I often tell people I have the best job in the world because I literally get paid to appreciate people. I want to welcome all of our volunteer Generation Fund grant recipients. Congratulations, and you are in this track. And so we've been going through the 8 volunteer management practices. And so today in this session, we're going to be talking about number 7, recognition and volunteer development. Before we get into the presentation, I want to take this time to really thank Volunteer Florida for their support, their undying support, the resources that they provide, the networking they provide, the ongoing support throughout the entire year, tips, tricks, people, trainings, all of the efforts that they put forth into building spectacular volunteer managers. The Arts Center actually had the opportunity to receive the grant for 3 years. And so this was our last year. So this was our 3rd year. And this experience has literally changed my life, not only as a volunteer manager, but just even as a person. I remember walking into that very, very first volunteer training that all the volunteer managers go through, just kind of like what you're doing now when they receive it, and meeting people who do exactly what I do, who could relate to me when I'm talking about things regarding volunteer management, and they knew what I was talking about. That was just one of the most spectacular and memorable moments of my entire life, because it was the first time that I realized as a manager in this profession of volunteer management that I was not in it alone. I had somebody else to talk to, bounce ideas off of, and more importantly, to understand what I was going through. And so recently I was awarded an Alive Impact Award, and it's given to volunteer managers who, it's an Emerging Leader Award for volunteer managers who have been in the profession for 1 to 7 years. And honestly, a lot of that is huge and hugely as a result of being a part of the grant recipient for this. And as a matter of fact, a colleague that I had met through Volunteer Florida, who was also another grant recipient, was one of the people who actually nominated me for the award. So the impact that you have had on my life, the impact that you have had on my organization's reach, and how we look at volunteers, I cannot tell you the magnitude of the effect that you have had on my life and my organization. And so I just really have to say thank you to Jovita, to Audrey and Kat, because what you have done for me and my organization with the support that you have given is the words. I mean, I know I just like spoke for the last 10 minutes about it, but I really don't have enough of the right words to say that would ever be able to convey the appreciation that I have. Okay, so now onto the presentation. So as I mentioned, yes, I am a manager of volunteers and interns here at the Arts Center. And we have about 300 volunteers, and our interns are included in that number. They range in age from 18 to 96. They represent over 29 different countries, over 29 different professions, and speak over 10 different languages. As we get into this, the one thing that I really like to do is start off with definitions, because this way we are all we are keenly aware that we are all on the same page. So let's start with the definition of recognition. It is a perception of something as existing or true, a realization, the expression of this in a form of some token of appreciation. Also, development, to bring out the capabilities or possibilities of, bring to a more advanced or effective state, to cause to grow or expand. And I have to tell you, not to keep going back to what Volunteer Florida has done, but when you talk about development, in the 3 years that I was a part of this program, that is literally exactly what you have done. You have brought me to a more advanced and effective state, and bring out the capabilities and possibilities within me that I did not even know existed. By the end of the session today, you're going to understand why recognition starts at orientation, identify different recognition types. You're going to be able to decide what type of recognition is right for each volunteer. You're going to be learning about why training and development can be used as recognition, as well as incorporating leadership development as recognition. So let me start by giving you the concept of this word, Ubuntu. It means I am because we are. Our CEO, Johan Zietsman, hails from South Africa, and at our very first staff meeting with him at the helm, he shared this concept. And it's the philosophy that has been permeating throughout the walls of our center. Nelson Mandela describes it as the profound sense that we are human only through the humanity of others, that if we are to accomplish anything in this world, it will in equal measure be due to the work and achievement of others. I mean, does that just not sum up volunteerism at all? Of course it does. I mean, they hit it on the nail. Now, what we all know and understand is that volunteer recognition and development is an organizational effort. It does not lie solely on the shoulders of the volunteer manager. Now, I know that if you manage volunteers, that you know that, and I know that, and that I'm completely preaching to the choir. We all know that obtaining institutional buy-in is crucial, because you could do all this work and do orientations and trainings, and then our volunteers have one interaction with a staff member and that volunteer is gone, or somebody didn't thank them or appreciate them, or they just didn't feel like their work was having impact and they're gone. So we all know this, but what you might be asking is, how do we go about getting that institutional buy-in? Well, I just wanted to share a few things that I was able to do. So number one, give your colleagues the benefit of the doubt. Do not make the assumption that they know or understand the impact that your program has. And same way that you can't make that, they can't make that assumption about you. I had the opportunity to be at a presentation in this large ballroom, and I asked, as like by show of hands, raise your hand if you believe that other people in your organization have no idea what your department does, and they have no idea what you do. Almost literally every single hand in the building went up. So what does that tell you? That you're not alone, that you feel that other people in other departments don't know what you're doing, because there could be, the truth of the matter is they probably feel the same way about you. So one thing I like to encourage people to do is build relationships, build interdepartmental relationships, go to lunch, have coffee. Well, that was obviously pre-COVID, but find ways to connect, have a conversation, set up a 30-minute conversation and just ask, what do you do, right? And be genuine about it. Don't be like, so what do you do? Like, don't be like that. Be genuine about it. Like, I would really like to gain an understanding of what you do here in the organization, and look for those common grounds. Look for those things that you both do, right? So for instance, like if it's development, right? And you both do outreach to your either your members and your volunteers, or you both have to do some type of recruitment effort. Look at the things that tie you together, right? Listen to the challenges that they have, and perhaps be a solution for them. Maybe there's something in your volunteer department that could offer a solution to a challenge that they have that they didn't even know could possibly be solved by a volunteer, especially when we're talking about skills-based volunteers. But that's another session, so I'll let them handle that. But in that conversation, now you are growing, you are learning about each other, you're building trust between each other. And naturally, what is going to happen is as you are learning about what they are doing, what you do, and how the volunteers affect the organization is going to naturally and organically come out. And you can both now become allies for each other. And the third thing I want to do is I want to encourage you not to take it personal. Everybody is, pretty much in their zone and they're all focused on trying to get their particular job done. They're not necessarily not including you or excluding you on purpose. They're probably just really just not thinking about it. And so, this was a conversation that I had with my supervisor, and I was just like, people just don't understand what the volunteers do, and they're just so overlooked. And my supervisor was like, well, then I challenge you to speak at our next all staff meeting and let them know what the volunteers do. And I was like, what? You want me to speak in front of the entire, what? Okay. I was like, you can't do it? She was like, no. Okay. So I got up the courage, and it was funny because I found these pictures of my first time. I think I don't even know how long I had been in the role, but not very, very long, and probably less than a year. And I stood before my colleagues and I told them about what our volunteers do and the impact that they have on the center. After it was all over, it was crazy because so many of my colleagues came up to me and they were like, Nicole, we had no idea. We had no idea that the volunteers did this. We had no idea that our volunteers could do that. And so it opened a dialogue, it planted a seed, and that was the beginning of the change of the institutional attitude towards volunteers. Not that it was a negative one, but it was just one of not being aware. And so finally, and then my colleagues actually started asking for the help of the volunteers more and more often. And now what did that do? That expanded the impact that we have within the organization and the reach that we have. And it has been just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful experience. And it has been developing and developing in such a way that before, when we used to have events, I might have anywhere between maybe 6 to 10 staff members and from maybe 2 or 3 different departments that will help to come celebrate the volunteers. And now it's up to the point where we might have upwards of 20 staff members from over 10 different departments who are coming together to help recognize and bring recognition and appreciation to the volunteers and all the things that they're doing. It is growing and really has become more of an organizational effort where everybody is assuming that responsibility because they know that it takes all of us Ubuntu in order to keep the volunteer program up and running and vital. So we're going to talk about orientation and understanding why recognition starts at orientation. It is important because it is the very first touch point that your volunteers have with your organization. So we actually do a full orientation, as you see here. This was obviously before COVID, where we might have anywhere between 50 to 75 people come in. We invite them in and we talk about everything that's going on. And I really want to talk about really quick before we really, really dive into it, what recognition is. So it's the perception of something as existing or true. The perception of something as existing or true. Literally acknowledging somebody, acknowledging their presence and accepting the fact that they are in the room with you. Because you see, actions speak louder than words. And it's such a small, significant task, but it speaks boundaries and just moves mountains in terms of how you value the volunteer. Now for us, because like I said, we might have 50 to 75 people that are coming in the room. So that is where I have really had to learn to make the effort when somebody is coming in. If I'm, everything is already set up, I had to make a better effort to get more prepared and more set up so that I wasn't making last too many last minute adjustments, so that when volunteers were coming in, I was able to greet them and say hello and ask them how did they hear about it, learn their name. Now I aspire to be that volunteer manager who eventually I know everybody's name. I mean, not everybody's name, but like every little detail about a volunteer. There's some of them that people have that in their file cabinet. I'm not that person, but I'm trying to get there. But even just that acknowledgement that they are in the room, and it actually touches just a little bit about, it touches a little bit on inclusion as well, acknowledging that you see that person and that they are welcome, that they are welcome. So one of the things that we do at our orientations is I invite our volunteers to come and talk to new prospective volunteers. They will come, they will share their story, they will share their experience and the impact that they have been able to have. And this does literally three things for us. Number one, it shows potential volunteers that we do value the voice of our current volunteers, and that we will value their voice as well. And then it also gives me the opportunity to show our prospective volunteers how I appreciate our current volunteers by being able to literally say, thank you so much for sharing your story. And the third thing that it does is it gives the new volunteers an opportunity for them to see themselves in the room. Now, it could be the proverbial room, whatever it is. This is just how we do ours. So even if yours is more of a one-on-one and an intake type of situation, what does the imagery of your program say? On your website, what type of pictures are up? Is it saying that we are welcome? Because a lot of times we say everybody is welcome, but then people don't see themselves there, so they don't believe it. So one of my favorite stories about when something like this happens is there was a lady who had been widowed, and she and her husband used to come to the theater all the time. And then she was hearing a story about somebody else who happened to be widowed as well. And it was like, I belong here. There's a place for me here. There's somebody else like me here, and I can thrive here. So it's so, so, so important just having that recognition and just the smallest little things that will make such a huge impact. Okay, now understanding the different types of recognition. So this is pretty self-explanatory. We have team recognition, which is recognizing the team on a whole. Every year we try to take a staff picture of all the volunteers, and we put it, we give them access to it. Our CEO for Volunteer Appreciation Week, he recorded a video to the entire team as a whole. When we were getting ready to do an orientation, the newspaper got a hold of it, and they published an article about the volunteer team as a whole. And like during National Volunteer Appreciation Week, I will do a collective, thank you to the entire team as the volunteers as a whole. But then what will happen is the different departments can then recognize the volunteers individually, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So, but that team recognition is so important in terms of not just coming from us, the volunteer manager, but the organization as a whole. And one of my most memorable moments of this was we had a very huge event that took place here at the Arts Center. NBC was hosting an event on our site. And at that time, it was the largest event of that type that we had done here at the center. So afterwards, the CEO and some other departments, they just kind of wanted to put together a party to celebrate our win, because it was a huge, huge win. And everybody was going to receive a commemorative ticket that had their name on it and the event on the ticket. And I remember to this day, I got the email from one of the departments saying, Nicole, can you please send me the list of names of every volunteer that participated in the event, because we want to make sure that they also receive their own individualized commemorative ticket. And I was just like, oh, yeah. And the reason why that was so beautiful was because it was the very, very first time that I didn't have to be like, hey, I know we're having a staff-wide celebration of this event. Can the volunteers come? Don't forget the volunteers. The volunteers were there too. Remember the volunteers. Don't forget about the volunteers. Can the volunteers come? Are they okay to come? they reached out to me first. I think it's because they knew the email was coming because they had just gotten so used to it. But the fact that they reached out to me before I even have to said that, it was just one of the most significant moments in my time here, because it was showing and it was letting me know that organizationally people are really starting to recognize, and they're starting to remember that, and starting to include the volunteers in these types of events. So I mean, just literally hands down one of my most favorite experiences. And another part of that event that was amazing was that because it was NBC and because they were filming for TV, they didn't want to have any empty seats. And because the volunteers were there, they hand selected some of the volunteers to sit in the audience. So if some of you, if you're looking at the picture and you're looking to the left, and it's on the left at the second picture, it's in the middle, and you might recognize Lester Holt. Yes, the TV personality, news anchor, Lester Holt. But I was like, that's all fine and great. But you know who I see? I see Hannah. I see my volunteer, Hannah, sitting behind Lester Holt, representing for the Arts Center, because they considered the volunteers so important and able enough to be able to go in and take part of that position to be able to help make the center look really, really great, and to help make the event look great on TV. Hands down, probably one of my absolute proudest moments. Now, I had touched a little bit about personal recognition earlier, right? In terms of, a lot of times the volunteer manager will do the global, but especially during Volunteer Appreciation Week, that is when, and mind you, remember, this all doesn't have to happen just during Volunteer Appreciation Week. This is stuff that can happen 365 days a year. You don't have to have the week to do it, just like you don't have to send flowers only on Valentine's Day. But anyway, I digress. Okay, so personal recognition, right? So I just want to use one example here. Lynn and her husband, they own a boat, and every summer they go sailing the 7 seas, and they send us pictures of where they are in the world. And so she typically comes in 3 or 4 days a week for 3 or 4 hours a week, or maybe it's 2 or 3 days a week for 3 or 4 hours a week, and she helps out our development department. So when it came time for recognition, they bought her a little home decor item that says home is where the anchor drops, so that they would not forget them when they were off traveling. And she was so touched, and it was so personal because they took the time to really get to know and understand who Lynn was, and it went over so well. Another type of recognition that people tend to overlook is personal feedback. This is huge, right? Telling a volunteer, or just anybody in general, but giving them that personal feedback in the moment, especially when they're doing something really, really, really great, and not just a generic thank you, like, oh, thank you for all your help today, thank you, but be specific. Thank you for entering those 300 names into that database, because now we're able to reach 300 extra households that have kids in it that are going to be able to participate in this program that we're doing. Or that you're being able to do that helps save me 2 hours to be able to get X and Y, Z finished, to get this project done. And I would not have been able to do it had you not done that. Or when you were in Excel, clearly we do a lot of stuff in Excel and databases, right? But when you were in Excel, and the way that you arranged the Excel, it was so great. All I had to do was open it, and I could find just what, between the colors and the cells, and whatever it is, whatever it happens to be. I'm just using Excel, but if whatever it is to your organization, maybe if they work with a client really, really well, or maybe if they interact with a guest really well and they handled it beautifully, especially if it was, if a guest might have been a little bit upset or disappointed, and they were able to really provide the most amazing customer service, and the guest or the client was like super happy by the time they left. Tell them in the moment what a phenomenal job they did, and the asset that they are to the organization, because this is going to continue to reinforce the fact of how valuable, not only just how valuable they are to the center, but just how much you value them, and you see it because you have acknowledged it, and you have recognized the importance of what they're doing, and you've been able to give them that feedback on the spot in the moment, and let them know just how much impact they are having. Another type of personal recognition, there are plenty of organizations out there who will recognize your volunteers. Case in point, Volunteer Florida during Volunteer Appreciation Week, or like throughout that month, they do a whole campaign and it's called 30 and 30, and they highlight different volunteers from different organizations across Florida that are doing really outstanding things. And so one of our volunteers was chosen. I'm very excited, Miss Judith Traum. She was chosen and she was featured and she was um, in their social media campaign. And it was beautiful because it's one thing for us as a volunteer managers, right, to appreciate our volunteers, because, you know, we're saying it all day. And then it's a whole nother level when the organization is doing it, right? And so now you have like the CEO or, you know, vice presidents or directors or just anybody in the building outside of the volunteer manager also appreciating them. But then now you have people outside of your organization also appreciating them. You are getting them on all fronts. So just something to consider. Look at other ways, not only within the organization, but outside of the organization, to get recognition for your volunteers, to really just continue to drive home the fact that they are valued. There's another one that the president's Volunteer Service Award. It's a quick Google. You can go in. There's some parameters that have to be met, but if your volunteers meet the parameters, go for it. Why not? And I know a lot of organizations use those and they hand them out, and it's to the point where now the volunteers are aware of the program and they have started to try to work towards achieving the President's Volunteer Service Award. So I just kind of wanted to put a couple of those out there. I also just wanted to show you a couple of things that we do here at the center, just for ideas. We give our volunteers pins. We give them milestone pins for their hours as well as for their years. So for 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 hours, all the way up. And then for 5 years or 10 years, our organization is still relatively young. So right now we just give the 5-year and the 10-year pin. We do an annual volunteer appreciation dinner, which we were not able to do this year, but in lieu of that, we did a drive-through situation, a drive-through celebration. And staff came out, they were holding up signs, they were driving through, people were honking, and they came by, we just dropped off a little gift in their trunk and they kept it going. And we just did it just this past weekend. And the feedback has been amazing. They really loved it. And just because with us, because we are Performing Arts Center, our doors have been closed. So the ushers have not been able to usher because there aren't any performances. And so many of them were like, it was just a way to connect to the center because they've been missing. And literally every car, we miss you. We miss you. We can't wait to come back. We will be here when the doors open. We miss you. Every last one of them were just talking about how much they couldn't wait to come back. And it was just like a source of connection because we've been away for so long. And then lastly, if our volunteers accrue a certain amount of hours, the organization will give them a basic membership to the organization. Okay, so deciding what style of recognition is right for each volunteer. Now, the most important thing to remember about this is recognition is in the eye of the beholder. We have all been in that situation where somebody came and they gave us, this gift, and we're looking at it like, thank you. And on the inside, you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? But you don't want to break the heart of the person who gave it to you because you could tell that they were very proud of themselves. And they're like, did you like it? Do you like it? And you're just kind of like, yeah. So, especially when it comes to personal recognition of a volunteer or just anybody in general, it's really good to kind of have an understanding of that person. And the reason why I say that this is so important, because I made the huge mistake once. We had a volunteer, she did this amazing job for something. And at a general assembly that we were at, I called her out and I was like, oh my gosh, and you guys, everybody give it up for volunteer so-and-so. She was amazing and she did this and she did this. And later found out that she was mortified because she does not like that type of attention. She would have rather me just come off to the side, just give her thank you, say, a little thank you. That's all she needed, and she would have been fine. So that leads me into talking about the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. And these are 5 general categories that people like and how they like to be appreciated. So you have words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and physical touch. And physical touch is kind of like, like either fist bumps or, like high fives or hugs or something like that. And obviously with the pandemic, that's truly limited at this point, so you can really focus on the other 4. But I highly encourage you to read this book. It will open your eyes, it will change your world in giving an understanding of how people would prefer to be appreciated, right? Because a lot of times you're like, well, but I wrote her a thank you note. I wrote her a thank you note. And I don't understand why they just don't know that they're not appreciated, because I tell them thank you all the time. But maybe that's not what speaks to them. Maybe actions speak louder than words. And you could say thank you all day, but if you just gave them a small little gift instead, that is what speaks to their language as a thank you, as an appreciation. I'm telling you, it'll rock your world. Get the book. So then you might be like, great, I understand. There's the 5 different languages. I've read the book like 3 times and in Spanish. I get it. But how am I supposed to know? How do I attribute it to each volunteer? Glad you asked. Guess what you do? You ask them. We literally put it on the application. How do you like to be recognized? Bam. It takes the whole guessing game out of it. And the way a lot of these platforms are today, the database platforms is that is information that you can take and put on their account, so you have it there, so you don't have to go through and try to remember for every person individually, especially if you're in upwards of like 300, 400, 500 volunteers. That could get difficult. Now, I know there are some volunteer managers who are beautiful at that, and again, like I mentioned, I aspire to be that person, but right now I know I'm not, so thank goodness that I can rely on the notes section. In addition, in our onboarding process, we ask them to fill out this getting to know you survey. And it just asks general questions like, if you're retired, what was your profession when you retired? Do you have kids? Do you have siblings? One of the questions I asked was like, oh, are you a twin? Come to find out, I have people in my volunteer program who were twins. And I was like, really? It just opens up that door and opens up that understanding. So now you have an idea of the things that they like, and you know how they like to be appreciated. So in the example with Lynn, you know that Lynn likes boats, but you know that she is more of a words of affirmation person. So instead of giving her a gift or calling her out in front of everybody, you might get a card that has a picture of a boat similar to the one that she has, and write her a nice personalized note and give that to her, and that could rock her world. So it's just really taking that time. Volunteer management is relationship business. That's literally what it is. Understanding and cultivating those relationships and knowing how to operate within them given the situation. Okay, so next we're going to talk about training and development as recognition. Okay. Training and development as recognition. So this is one of my favorite stories that I like to tell in terms of development and training. So Judith here, you will see here, she is a volunteer that has been with us from the beginning, and she is one of our audio describers. And she and another audio describer, her name is Stephanie, who is not pictured here, they heard about a conference that was taking place in Las Vegas, hosted by the American Council of the Blind. And they really thought it would be very beneficial for them to go. And they asked their manager, would the Arts Center consider covering some of the expenses? So the manager was like, well, all we could do is ask. Let's ask. So long story short, the manager asked. The Arts Center said, yes, we can help cover. So the Arts Center actually covered the registration fees and the hotel fee for the conference. They had to cover their meals and all those other incidentals and the flights, but to them it didn't matter because they had so many frequent flyer miles that they just used those to get their tickets. So they were able to attend the conference, and this is the beautiful thing. at the conference, the organizers had heard of some of the work that these two audio describers had been doing prior to them attending. So they actually received an award for what they were doing when they went to the conference, but nobody knew about it till they got there. They didn't know about it so much that somebody else accepted the award on their behalf and said, we'll get this to the people at the Art Center, not knowing that they were in the audience. But the beautiful part about this is not only did it reinforce the importance of their training to become audio describers, but with that and that development that they had when they came back, not only did they hone their craft, but now they are now raising up the next generation of audio describers. And that is who you see here, Sarah. Sarah learned from Judith and Stephanie. Sarah has become such an amazing asset to the team that our Miami City Ballet actually chose her to do audio description for them for, I believe it was for the Nutcracker. And so I think because they're recording the Nutcracker, they wanted audio description, and then they actually chose Sarah. Judith and Stephanie developed Sarah so well that now Sarah is doing other things. And now all three of them are doing trainings to build up the next set of volunteers. So it is absolute development, not only just from them learning, but now they are training up the next generation and training up the next generation. And you are seeing the level of growth that is happening, and it is a beautiful thing. And you can see that they take a lot of pride in it, and it's something like they really make sure that people are going to be trained and trained properly before they're just like sent out there to just do something, because they want to make sure that it's done with excellence. And I'm telling you, it is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sight to see, and just how much pride that they have in it, which is why they won that award. Another thing that we will do is we have a volunteer advisory team, and sometimes they will lead those meetings. And back in the earlier slides, there was a picture of Bill McDonald. You may not have seen him. Why would you have known who he was? Because I didn't point him out. But he was a volunteer that is an usher, and he came in just as, you know, just as a volunteer. And I want to bring him up because you're going to see his path of development. He just started off as a volunteer, and then as we started to do the orientations, he stepped up and started coming to the orientations and started talking to the prospective volunteers about his experience and all of these things. And you're going to kind of keep seeing it, seeing his development thread through as we continue to go through. So the last thing that I want to talk to you about is incorporating leadership and development as recognition. So with COVID and our doors being closed, we had to make quick adjustments. So one of the things that we started doing was online trainings. And a lot of the content and the suggestions came from the volunteers themselves. And this totally loops back to that whole getting to know you survey, because when you understand the value and the diamonds that are in your program, when things like this happen, you now know where to go mine. You know who to go reach out to in order to help fulfill a need, especially them being skills-based. So Martha here, she actually works for an insurance company, and they were getting a lot of insurance claims like from back issues and things like that, because since everybody transitioned to home, working from home and having that ergonomic works, they did not have ergonomic workstations. So people were not sitting properly, and you know, they were either lounging or however. So a lot of people were starting to get hurt. So Martha was on the team that was giving presentations on how to create an ergonomic workstation at home. And she was gracious enough to come and give that same presentation to the volunteers. So she took that time out of her schedule and came and gave that presentation. It was an amazing, amazing presentation. The stuff that I learned, fabulous. And it also fulfilled that opportunity to be able to connect with her fellow volunteers, take a leadership role, and people now really had a newfound respect for her because they didn't really know that she had this knowledge before. And she was so thrilled and just happy to be able to provide something back to the volunteer team, which eventually is going to help out the entire organization. And because we've recorded it, people can go back and watch it over and over. And then let me talk to you about Renee. So Renee was taking sign language classes. And one of the things that we decided to do was to have somebody come in and give us basic ASL on how we can help our guests. Now, so since we work in the theater, we wanted to just learn basic signs that would help us. Like, how can we tell somebody who is deaf where their seat location is, where the concessions are, where the bathroom is, learning those basic things. So we came in, we had an amazing training, but afterwards I asked Renee if she would be interested in helping to lead a study session or a practice session for 1 month, and everybody just get together and practice the signs, because learning it was one thing, but anything like that, you have to continue to put it into practice. And we have plenty of time to be practicing between now and when the theater opens back up. So we could be well versed in those by the time the theater opens back up. And she said yes. So every week for a good month, she and this team, and that's what you see right here, they would come together. We practice ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, ticket location, all of those things. But that was an opportunity for her to showcase her talents and the things that she was learning, to be able to reach out and give back to the volunteer team, learn to connect. And the same thing with Martha, learning and understanding a whole new aspect and avenue that Renee has to be able to give back to the organization and to her fellow volunteers. I had mentioned a little bit earlier about the volunteer advisory team. So I don't know, obviously, because like I said, I didn't point it out the first time, but Bill is in this picture. So Bill went from being an usher, just being an usher, being a volunteer, to stepping up at the orientations. And then actually, because we found out that Bill used to be a corporate trainer, he helped to lead one of our the trainer programs. So he was helping to train other people to help train up our new ushers as they were coming in to the organization. So he stepped up a little bit there as well. And then now Bill is sitting here. He's the gentleman on the right-hand side, second person in. He's on our volunteer advisory team. Now, what this team is it is a hand-selected group of volunteers that represents the team as a whole. And every month we meet and I run things by them. They're my sounding board. And before I make any type of sweeping decision, I run it by them and I ask them, what do you think? Get their feedback on it, and just try to get a litmus of the decision that I'm about to make, or just run some ideas. Or if they have concerns about anything, they bring it up to me in this meeting. And so each year, we start from scratch. A person can be on the advisory team for up to 3 years. But every year they have to go through the entire process. They have to be nominated and they have to go through an interview process. And we do that because that way we keep fresh perspectives. And if the organization in one particular year is going in a different direction, we can choose the team based upon where the organization is going that particular year. So this was a happy accident, right? I didn't realize that this was such an honor. To me, it was just a way for me to interact and really get a better idea of how the volunteers were feeling on a whole, because I can't necessarily talk to 300 volunteers, but I can talk to at least one volunteer who represents the docents, one volunteer who represents our admin, one volunteer who represents our audio describers, and they can bring to the table the concerns that they have. So sometimes they would time out, it would be after their 3rd year, or sometimes I would have the hard, I have to let them know the news that maybe they didn't make it back the next year. And they were like, first of all, so gracious. And then they were just like, it was such an honor to serve and be on this committee, to be able to help make changes and to be a liaison and to be a leader and a help to my colleagues and all of these things. And I was like, what? I had no idea. But it turns out it was a way of recognizing them in a way that I didn't even realize that I had done. But it turned out to be one of the a huge asset, a huge asset, not only to us, but in terms of helping to build up that self-esteem and those leadership qualities within our volunteers. So just to kind of recap, we talked about understanding why recognition starts at orientation, identifying different recognition types, deciding what style of recognition is right for each volunteer, training and development as recognition, and incorporating leadership and development as recognition. Now, I can almost hear it right here. I can hear it. Oh, Nicole, that's all fine and great, and that's all beautiful. But we are a small organization and we don't have that kind of budget. We can't be throwing parties and buying all this stuff for people, right? You're wondering, where are you getting the money for all of this? Or you may not even be wondering where we're getting the money. You just might be like, well, we can't do half of that because we don't have the money. Well, I want to challenge you on that, because all of these suggestions that we are throwing out there, with the exception of our annual dinner, they are either free or low cost to do. Developing and the Las Vegas, that one wasn't, but taking the time out to develop somebody, taking the time out to recognize the skills within them and pairing it up with a need in the organization, the only thing that costs is time. So just because it might be free or low cost does not mean that it's not valuable. It is actually extremely valuable. So just kind of put some thought behind it. Kind of take this time to think about what you can do. And here's the beautiful thing, right? Low budgets ignite creativity. Yes, they do. You have to get creative when you don't have the dollars. So one of the things that we did, or one of the things that I did, because I like to write and I like to encourage people. So one of the things that I did is I created a journal, 101 affirmations for my volunteers. And Amazon is a beautiful thing. I created the journal, published it in Amazon, and then gave it to my volunteers as a thank you, because our budgets were slashed. So I didn't have budget money to be able to go out and buy a lot of things for the volunteers. So I was able to create the journal. And the funny thing about it was it cost me more to mail the journal than it did the actual cost of the journal. And so I challenge you, think outside the box. What is it that you are gifted in? Maybe it's something that you can paint for a volunteer, or maybe compose a song, or who knows, but think outside of the box in terms of different ways that you can recognize the volunteers. And if you can't think of it, then look, here's this book, get it, 1,501 Ways to Reward Employees. I usually just take the word employees out, I put volunteers in, and there is something in there that you can absolutely use. And at the very least, it will spark ideas of other things that you can do. And this is a PDF, and this comes from Lindsay Jacks from the Family Tree. And it's a whole bunch of low cost and free ways to appreciate the volunteers. And so I'm going to make sure that you all have this PDF as well. So don't let money be something, don't let that be a barrier to the things that you can do in order to recognize and develop your volunteers. In addition, barter with your colleagues, especially the volunteer grant recipients, the Volunteer Generation Fund grant recipients. Network. I know when we were coming together, we had a whole list of everybody who had won the grant that year, and it was a way for us to network. So talk to your buddies. Maybe, okay, if we're a theater and you work at a nature preserve, maybe I can swap out tickets and you can give us a general admission to the nature preserve. Whatever it is that your organization has, even if you're like at a hospital, or even if you are at, maybe it's a homeless shelter, or you're working with kids, there is some type of benefit that your organization has that you can swap out somehow. Get creative with it. Be just thinking outside of the box. There's sky is the limit. Call on your colleagues. This is where it's about, right? Ubuntu. I am because we are. If there's something that I can't do, maybe there's something that you can, and vice versa. This is where we need to come together to help each other out. And the last thing that I would like to throw out there is try to find a sponsor. A good friend of mine who also manages volunteers, at a performing arts theater, they were able to get a sponsor for their volunteer dinner. So her budget wasn't touched at all. They got it completely sponsored. Look, people like to walk around. They like people in businesses like to see other people in businesses walking around with their name on their shirt. Tell them to sponsor a shirt. Who knows? Say or tell them to sponsor something and you'll put their name on a shirt. You can put their name on the volunteer homepage. There's sky is the limit. If you have a grants department, work with that department. If you have a development department, work with that department. If not, just get creative and call your neighborhood, mom and pop store and say, hey, if you do this as a way to thank our volunteers, we will put your name out there and make sure that we thank you, because we all know that the greatest ambassadors that you have at your organization are your volunteers. So if some organization did something nice for them and we say, hey, this is what they did, you don't think that the volunteers are not going to go back and go out into the streets and sing the praises of the organization of who gave them something in appreciation? Of course they are. So those are just some things I just wanted to throw out there. And again, I just don't want money to be a barrier to anything that you are trying to do in order to recognize and develop your volunteers. Okay, so I hope this has been helpful. If you would like to reach out to me, this is my contact information. You can find me on all social media platforms at Nicole R. Smith Net, and there's my email, nsmith@ourcenter.org. And so now I would just like to open it up for any questions. Hi. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Okay, so moderators, I want to make sure people could still see me and hear me, right? Because I don't see any questions, or I'm not sure what happens now.
Yep. There are some comments coming in through the chat. It does take a few seconds usually for people to type up a question, but.
Okay. So the whole thing I just hope that you all get out of this is, and I'm sure it's something that you all already know, that how we recognize and appreciate our volunteers, or even that we do it, is important. Number one, it's important that we do it, but how we do it is just as important, because you just don't want it to fall flat. And the last thing is that there are ways. You just have to be creative and think outside of the box. And if you are at an organization and you are lucky enough to have a budget, beautiful. But if you don't, just like I said, don't worry about it. There are ways. You can also tap into the volunteers in your program, right? Because we have a volunteer that handcrafts and creates pots. So if there's a specific something that you're wanting to do, tap into your volunteers. And it's all going back to that getting to know you survey and what they've done, and tapping into those talents and using those talents as the gold that they are. So that's just kind of the last thing that I wanted to say. I'm just
I do see some questions.
Oh, okay.
Someone asked, do you have any suggestions for larger audiences? Pre-COVID, we had about 200 plus volunteers that serve weekly. And a couple people wanted to know what you gave during your drive-through recognition.
Oh, okay. So yes, during the drive-through recognition, we gave out little things like little fans that you plug into the phone, like little cell phone. It's just, they're like this big, but you plug them in and they turn into fans. People go crazy over them. Those generic plastic sunglasses, we were able to get our center branded, but just the stuff that you would not think, right? Because I'd be like, how are people going crazy over these little plastic, those little things that they give out at fairs and festivals, but people love them. So I'm like, okay, buying things, especially from a promotional company where you can buy them in bulk and get them for really inexpensive. But we gave them, can you guys see it? This pencil. They loved it. It's just a musical note pencil. So that was what was in the recognition in the bags, just little like coasters, little just like really trinkets. In this particular case, it was really just the act of, we appreciate you, thank you, drive by. Like they were just very, very happy about that. For larger audiences, we've done things, but we've teamed up with our marketing department, and I am always going to our marketing and advancement department. And I'm like, hey, because they typically are always buying stuff and then they buy too much and then they never use it. So I'm always like, hey, I'm here to help you. If you really need to get rid of all those extra towels that you purchased, or all those extra mugs that you purchased, or all those extra umbrellas, and you don't have storage, we'll gladly take them off of your hand. We would have posters. Because they would order, because we are at a theater, they would order posters so that when artists come in, they would sign them. And then so at the end of the year, they would have either a whole bunch of unsigned posters or signed posters, but they just never went anywhere. And they were like, oh, what are we going to do with this? I'm like, don't throw them out. I'll give them to the volunteer. I am always pilfering, okay? I'm like just going through like, hey, y'all need this, because, we're here for you. We'll do. We are here for you. We can help you out with that. So depending on the size of the organization, depending on the size of whatever you all have, I'm always going to different departments, and just like if there's anything that you all have left over that you had ordered more of that you aren't going to need, even if there was like an event, and maybe we ordered a whole bunch of t-shirts and now they're left over, I always use those. I'm always taking that stuff to then turn around and give to the volunteers. But for because like I said, we have about 300 volunteers. So a lot of times what we would do is we buy something that's small, but in bulk as that appreciation. And then we really rely on, well, not rely, but we really count on it. And I really encourage the departments that have volunteers that work with them individually to really try to hone in on them, because then they can give them a little bit of a bigger of a gift. Like one year, some of our departments, they gave the volunteers flowers. They gave them gift cards to the cafe that was on site. So, and that's where that whole really getting to know and understand who your volunteer is. So that would be as far as like a large group. Kind of a lot of the things that we gave at the drive-through appreciation would be an example of what that would be. That's how I would think about it. But also, we've also done like handwritten notes, like handwritten cards. For the holidays, right? Because we have a huge Miami is extremely, extremely multicultural, and we have just so many things, so many religions and cultural. It's beautiful. And so when it comes to the holiday season, it gets tricky because you have everybody that's celebrating a whole bunch of different things. So between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and Hanukkah and all the other ones, so between November and December, let me put it that way, we actually sent out like a holiday card and hand wrote in them and mailed them out. So and that didn't take a lot, because what happened, again, marketing had printed up a lot and they were sending them out to their clients. And I was like, hey, can we get on that list? And they were like, sure. And of course it didn't cost much because they were ordering in bulk. So I was able to get in on that order. Develop the relationships with your other departments. It's amazing what can come out of it. So that's my tip. Let me see. The language of appreciation. How do we find a way to connect once the appreciation isn't received as expected or intended? Beautiful. I love this question, right? Because clearly, well, not clearly, right? Because I'm the type of person, like everything's written on my face. If you give me something, I'm kind of like, ah! But there are some people who are really good about it. Oh my gosh, thank you. And then they turn around, they're like, oh my God, this is trash. Yeah. If they don't give you an indicator, there's not really going to be a way for you to know. So that one is going to be a little bit more challenging. But if you do give it to somebody and their face does say something, just ask them. Like I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry. Is that okay? And they'll be like, no, but it's fine. I'm like, no, but I really want to make sure, it's important to me that I make sure that I get you something that you can use or whatever. And then they will open up. Or a big telltale is if it's something like, here's a perfect example. I gave my assistant, because I saw that she drinks coffee a lot. So I gave her a tumbler with a top on it because I didn't want it. I was concerned that because she was always drinking open cups of coffee, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want that to spill on the dashboard. What's that thing? The keyboard. Okay. And so I gave her like the tumbler with the top on it. And like a week or two went by and I noticed that she wasn't using it. So I just kind of asked her, I was like, so did you not like it? And she was like, no, it's not that. I loved it so much that I didn't want to use it. Or I just really, the tumblers don't really work, or it's just kind of being observant. And then honestly, that's my advice, would just be just to flat out ask, and then ask them, how do they, how do they prefer? But that is also why it's try to get it on when they're coming in. But I mean, a lot of you might be hearing this and so it's going to be retroactive, which is okay. But it's a new season. Start off and be like, hey, we're doing this new thing and we want to get to know our volunteers better, and send it out. I didn't send mine out until like the middle of the season. It wasn't until I kind of learned this and I made it like this new initiative that we were doing. But then after I did that, then we incorporated it in as new volunteers came in. But do it as it's a holiday thing. We want to see blah, blah, blah. Tie it into your organization somehow. We want to see what kind of gifts you have and and throw it in there and then go from there. Coming in as a new AmeriCorps Vista leader with established vistas, what would be the best way to ask how they would like to be recognized? I'm very much a person to be just like, I'm frank and straight up, right? And I'm just like, we want to make sure that we are recognizing you the way that you would like. We're creating this survey. Please fill it out. Because literally the only way you're going to find out is if you ask. You can't tap dance. You can't try and figure it out because, some people are really, really good and they can look at you just like this and, oh my gosh, this is the best thing that you've ever given me. And and that thing is like in the trash before they even leave the building. And they're strategic about which trash can to put it in so that you don't see it, right? So the best way is just flat out ask, how do you like to be recognized? And if you don't want to be that blunt about it, then create a questionnaire in such a way that, you can tap dance around it. Do you prefer, flowers or cards or things like that? I'm just like such a direct person, but that's my personality. So you have to go kind of with how your personality is, but I'll just be straight up. Boop, boop. Because there's no better way to get a direct answer than just ask a direct question. So, but it all depends on the comfort level and, where you are in the relationship that you've already built with the volunteers. And if you're not the type of person who wants to do that, then I highly, highly recommend developing those relationships, because the more you're having coffee with them, the more you're sitting and talking with them. And then now you're taking mental notes, right? That's how they figured out the whole thing about with Lynn and her boat. They're like, oh, well, we're sailing and And I was like, oh, okay, ding, ding. So if you're not going to ask them directly, make sure that you are developing and having those relationships and conversations. And, oh, well, how are your kids today? Or how does with the dog today? And, oh, so now I know, the next time I get a card, maybe it'll be a card with a little doggy on the front. So really, really paying attention to what they're saying if you don't want to do the direct ask.
All right. Thank you so much, Nicole. We enjoyed your energy first thing this morning. Loved it. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Please make sure that you fill out your session survey. It can be found in the events tab in the attendee portal. There is a quick 15-minute break and the next session starts at 10:15. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.